Hey guys, I'm sorry that you're not seeing me today in person, but through a video screen. I'm gonna be honest, this is bringing me a lot of PTSD from the COVID era of not looking at people in the room, but looking at a camera. But that's all right. We're gonna power through this. All right. I think this is better than just trying to get off schedule, because I think we're gonna have the rock tomorrow because of I think the snow will be done by tomorrow. But the snow's definitely bad enough for us to need to cancel 707. So we want to keep you guys safe. So we're gonna cancel 707 tonight, and I don't want to screw up all the timing of the schedule. So we're gonna trudge forward into our section of Hebrews today. We can't all be together in person, but that's okay. I'm just gonna encourage you guys to just continue doing it personally, just individually, and then once you've spent time in the text for today, then hopefully you're looking at the teaching for the text, and we're gonna walk through it together. All right. So this is assuming that you've already read the text before at this point. So if you get a little bit confused about something, just maybe pause and at least read through it once or something like that. So we're just going to keep going, and that way next time when we start our next passage next week, we'll already have gone through this week's, so we have some context for it. All right, so our text for today is Hebrews 4:14 to 5:10, and where we stopped off last week was a super powerful part of the whole Bible, right? In Hebrews 4:12 it says, "For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword." The pastor leaves us with this really powerful verse, and after revealing to all that we are a continuation of Israel, that just like Moses and the original Israel was led out of slavery in Egypt by Moses, and then Joshua led them to the promised land, which was Canaan. He says that Jesus is now the better Moses, and he's leading us out of slavery from sin. And then Jesus, the better Joshua, is leading us into the promised land, far better and more eternal than a chunk of territory in the Middle East that the original Israel experienced, right? And this encourages us not to give up, because we have a better leader taking us along the way, who's Jesus. Now he's going to shift his focus again to Jesus, and specifically a role that Jesus has and is super necessary for us to succeed in our journey of faith. He teased this in chapter 2, but didn't really get into it. And now here we are. We're going to be really diving into this role that Jesus has. And this is Jesus being our high priest. So let's read this together in Hebrews 4:14. "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." What can we observe here? All right, what surprises you? What commands are there to obey? I'm just kind of going through that study guide that we have for you guys every week. What promises are there to believe, right? Well, we see, for one, that Jesus is our high priest, and this is the real central role that we see in this section, right? He ascended into heaven. And what does that mean? Well, the role of a high priest for the Jews was a super important role. This was a person that represented God's people to God, right? He was the guy that would speak on your behalf to the big man up there, right? And in order to do this, he would go to the most holy place in the temple where God's Spirit physically was, and he would go behind this curtain into God's physical presence in the temple. This was something that only the high priest was allowed to do, and he would speak for you there. And now we have Jesus going into the presence of God by physically ascending into heaven and speaking on our behalf. Like, how cool is that? But the pastor keeps going on. Let's keep observing and interpreting here. Let's keep going down that list, that line of our study guide. All right, it's not that we just have a high priest who isn't like us. We have one who is like us. And we need that, because how can Jesus speak to us or speak for us to the Father if he doesn't understand us or if he doesn't know us? But the pastor says he does know us and he does understand us. And there's three main things that he highlights here to show us this. First, he has endured temptation. Like us, he has endured and withstood the onslaught of temptation, of sin staring at him in the face. He didn't just sit in heaven away from this dirty, broken world that we live in. He got down into the mud with us. I mean, it would be like imagine if I tried to relate to Dave Wills, right? And if you ever spend any time with Dave, he'll tell you about his upbringing in the streets of Cleveland, right? He had a more rough neighborhood that he grew up in, and imagine if I tried to be like, yeah, I get it, Dave. Like, I totally understand what it's like growing up in a rough neighborhood. When I grew up in Northville, and if you guys know anything about Northville, it's not a rough neighborhood. It's a very cushy community, very well off, and that was my upbringing, right? I could never understand what Dave went through as a kid. And Jesus doesn't do that either. He left his lofty place in heaven and endured the brokenness of our world and the attacks of sin. So that when we struggle with sin, he doesn't just sit there and tell us to just get over it, coming from the standpoint of someone who's never dealt with it. He understands our weaknesses and empathizes with that. And that should really encourage us about Christ. But this is just the first reason that he knows and understands us, why he's worthy of being our high priest, to represent and intercede for us. The second comes in chapter 2. So let's read that together. This is 5:7. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. He was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. What we see here is that he has endured suffering. Have you ever suffered and felt the need to cry out to God in the midst of your pain and your trial? So has Christ. He understands what pain and suffering really is. When we clearly see here in this verse from the Gospels is that God the Father did not give Jesus some kind of magic force field to protect him from the trials and the struggles of our world. He endured sickness and disease. He probably had a virus at some point that made him puke his guts out until his stomach cramped up. He endured injuries to his body. Obviously, the most incredible and worst was what he endured at the cross. He endured emotional roller coasters, just like we do, around pain and sadness and rejection. He knows what it's like to cry out to God to help in time of suffering. But the last one is weird, and I think we often don't think of Jesus' time on earth this way, but the pastor of Hebrews is clear about it. And I'm going to read that same verse that I just did, but I'm going to highlight a slightly different word because it reveals something to us. And this is Hebrews 5:8. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. What we see is that Jesus learned how to obey. He had to learn how to obey. Now, this might sound like heresy for a second, but it's not. Jesus is the second member of the Trinity. He was there at the creation of the universe. In the beginning of Hebrews, the pastor says that Jesus sustains all things through his powerful word. He's higher than the angels and everything else. He's already established that. So that means he knows all things and he doesn't lack anything, right? Correct. He lacks nothing. And that's why he couldn't understand us unless he was one of us. He didn't know what it was like to lack something the way we do. So then Jesus, the Son of God, needed to come to earth to be one of us, to learn how to obey as a human being, living in a broken and sinful world. That was something even God couldn't know unless he actually went through it. And God himself went through this and to learn how to obey for you, for me, for us. That should blow your minds that he endured all of this so that he could understand us and represent us to the Father right now. Hebrews 4:16 says, "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Because of this work of Christ, because he went through what he went through, we can now approach God's throne with confidence because we have a high priest who will intercede for us and who can intercede for us. Some of you guys may know this about me, but I have a little bit of a personal bubble, mainly when it comes to my face. I just don't like it when people touch my face. I don't know. Maybe everyone has that to a degree, but I do. But you know, the one exception to that rule is my kids. When my kids were all just 1 and under, they went through that period of zero personal space. They get up in your face and they would love to pull my beard. They love to just kind of grab at my eyes and pull my nose and yank on my ears. And they would do that all the time. And I specifically remember Molly being like the worst at that. She just loved to pull my beard. She thought it was kind of like stirrups on a horse. She thought that if she pulled my beard this way, then she could make me travel this certain way or whatever. Here's the thing about that though. I was totally fine with it. I loved it. Only Molly, only Lily, only my kids are able to do that and me be okay with it. Why? It's because she's my daughter. She's my little girl. And now, what the author of Hebrews is saying is that we are allowed to approach God like his children because Jesus made it a way for us to approach him that way. We approach confidently, like my little 1-year-old would confidently pull on my beard knowing that it wasn't going to bother me because she knew who she was. She's my daughter. You may have some questions about Melchizedek here because that name pops up in this point, but I'm going to hold off on explaining this until a couple weeks from now. But from now, what I want us to take from this section is I'm going to take our application question that you guys may have gone through together in our study, because I've come up with an application for our section here. Knowing Jesus is a greater high priest should make you feel understood and should make you want to approach God in prayer with confidence and joy. This should change your prayer life because God listens and understands you because of the work of Christ. Well, that's all we got. That's our passage right now. Next week, we're going to go into chapter 6, and chapter 6 is a doozy, so get ready for that. And hopefully I won't be talking to you through a video camera. So love you guys, miss you, and I can't wait to see you next week. See ya.